It's a great honor to have these three wonderful panelists here with us. And before I read their bios, I was just thinking how befitting it is that we're sitting here, we're just saying, among all these women's visual voices, and many of which we don't even know who they were, the quilts, we don't know the identity of the makers, and it just seemed like the right space to have this conversation. So our three panelists tonight, the first to the far left is Isolde Brielmaier, and she is a curator, scholar, and the National Executive Director of Arts, Culture, and Community at Westfield, where her primary focus is the Oculist at Westfield World Trade Center, as well as the Century City in LA. In this curatorial capacity, she oversees artist projects and installations, cultural events, museum partnerships, school programming, and community partnerships, all integrated with the latest technology. Isolde also serves as assistant professor of critical studies in Tish's Department of Photography, Imaging, and Emerging Media at New York University, as well as a curator at large at the Tang Museum, and continues to work on a range of cultural projects that bridge both the public and private sectors. Previously, Isolde has worked for the Guggenheim Museum, the Bronx Museum of Art, and is chief curator for the SCAD Museum of Art. In December of 2016, she was named to the board of trustees of the new museum. She is deeply committed to the promotion of arts, education, global women's issues, and criminal justice reform. In October 2015, she was invited as a guest to the White House on the occasion of President Obama's Declaration of National Juvenile Justice Month. Anne Huntington is a collector and the head of strategy and business development at Huntington Learning Center, and is the founder of MAH, a creative agency for contemporary culture. Anne has curated more than 30 exhibitions and is equally known for her support in New York institutions, as a co-chair of the Young Collectors Council at the Guggenheim Museum, a founding member of the Future Leadership Council at the Whitney, and a board member of Pioneer Works. Anne's own collection reaches from emerging artists to established names and includes work by Pat Steer, David Hockney, Lisa Yuskavage, Tom Wesselman, and hundreds of others. Maria Giulia is an avid art collector in addition to serving as U.S. retail director and global brand ambassador of the fashion house Max Mara, founded by her grandfather. Max Mara has a strong history of dedication to the arts. The collection Maramotti is a private contemporary art collection that opened to the public for free in 2007 in the historical headquarters of Max Mara. It presents a permanent collection of 220 works from 1945 to the present, together with site-specific projects and temporary shows. The collection also oversees the Max Mara Art Prize for Women, a biannual award given to emerging female artists in collaboration with the Whitechapel Gallery. Maria Giulia also serves on the board of trustees of Ballroom Marfa. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I thought a lot about this topic of patronage, which in some circles, when it's about women, I've heard it referred to as matronage. But,
Not sure how I feel about that.
I'm just saying,
Me neither.
we can talk about that. Let's call it support.
Mecenatism.
Yes, exactly. But I think about it because I look at my own collector base and, I see the numbers and it's sometimes as high as 75% men. I think about how the success of an artist can so much depend upon their ability to meet the demands of their patrons. And I just think about, the type of work that you do and how that changes the landscape of where we are today. So just to start, can you talk about the various ways that you define patronage, and also a little bit about your path and how that has defined the activities that you do?
Do you want to start? Yeah, okay. Sure. So I think for me, and I have to sort of qualify that I do collect in a small way, but my collection is made up primarily of works that have been given to me by artists. So I work really in the space of curatorial as well as scholarship. But that said, I think when we think of patronage, people often think of it in a more sort of traditional and historical sense, right? So you think of the Italian banking dynasty of the 15th century, the Medicis, or you think of the 11th century court of the, great ancient kingdom of Benin in what is now southern Nigeria. These are all sort of historical entities that are very well known for supporting artists and commissioning work. If we fast forward quite a bit from those centuries to today, I think when we think of patronage, it's really as I think both of you have just said, a broad range of support, and it's an incredibly diverse space. So for me, when I think of it in terms of institutions and organizations, foundations, granting organizations that support artists, galleries and gallerists, I think are incredibly essential to that equation. Museums and I'll throw myself in there sort of as the curatorial practice in terms of really working with artists to honor their vision, increase their cultural currency, their visibility, which I'm sure will come up for us quite a bit. And then also thinking about artists themselves. I mean, I think we're in a really interesting time right now. It's a really unstable time, but I think that that has opened up these spaces where artists actually have quite a bit of agency and can sort of self-generate in a way. So if you think of, and I'm going to move into the tech space, Kickstarter. A number of artists that I know have actually looked to Kickstarter or other sort of tech platforms or artist collectives to sort of self-generate funding for their work. So for me, it's an incredibly broad and exciting space, and then it's no surprise then that women have kind of found, as we were saying earlier, kind of a visible stronghold in that space. I think that is growing and will only continue to grow.
Really well said. We can go home now. Hi everyone, happy Monday. I think that patronage is a really loaded word, and the equalizer is time. So regardless of who you are, we have limited time. So how do we make the most of the time we have? And that's through impact and giving back and really stamping our generation and our time so that in the future those can look back and say, okay, wow, this is a foundation, or this is what we've built upon. So with that, I think it's really important to focus, because it's very easy to sprinkle ideas throughout and not have a direct impact, to use that word. Nowadays, yes, we can speak of the old, of the Medici, et cetera, but nowadays a lot of corporations are looking at patronage, and it's under the name, let's say, or the phrase of corporate responsibility. And how do we give back, and how do we ensure that the next generation, this baby to my right, is in a world where she can see and be heard and be seen, and then also get inspiration from what's around her. So in terms of patronage, I think it's really a support system that is focused and dedicated to individual desires and wishes and needs. We can't save everything, but if each of us are able to figure out what is important to that individual, then the world will be a better place.
Wow. Yeah, I personally, I really relate to the sense of patronage in a very personal way. I am the Italian, obviously, so in a way it comes with like a little bit more of traditional sense, I might say. But first of all, I'm amused at what I have seen, since I've been living in the States, on how really this pragmatism, right, this really connecting dots, which in my country are not exactly something, here you take it for granted. Let me just say that it's not something that you want to take for granted. I think that in a way the idea of, as you both were saying, like I'm amused of like what is happening in the technological aspect of it. I think that it has been a game changer to the art world. But most importantly, so we think about technology, we think about the concept of time and making choices. I think that is what we were discussing, right? I'm an entrepreneur, so at the end of the day I have a budget of like spending that I pick very pragmatically, and to be honest with you, if I have to I want to dedicate it to something that I love, and most importantly to something that has to say something to the young generation, but also that as our generation makes us think, right? Think to the next level. And I think that art and performing art is exactly what, in my personal experience, there's people that give to hospitals, but art makes me happy. It makes me it is really a very important part of my life, and therefore that is what I choose to do, to kind of make sure that this incredible system that will basically separates us from animals, right? Because art is what separates us from animals, keeps being nurtured.
Mm-hmm. It's very personal.
It is, yeah. I think it has to be personal though. Otherwise there's no love.
Yeah. Well, that that's a good segue into my next question, because I think, I find that among many of my clients, it's that they feel a personal level of responsibility in whatever their mission is, and whatever activities, collecting, or other types of patronage that they make. But what level of responsibility do you feel when it comes to supporting diverse voices, whether it be voices of women or artists of color, both in your own personal collections and your greater activities?
Should I go first?
You can.
All right, so yeah, let's do. Well, I guess that, you know, it's funny because when I started collecting personally outside the Maramotti estate, I found myself starting to collect, and basically the first 5 artists that I bought were women. The only man that I have right now is sitting over there. And it was completely random, I have to say to you. And then I realized, and then of course, and then you know, after having some of Andy Cross's work, I bought other gentlemen's work for the records. But I think that, like, as a artist lover, I believe that for so long, maybe there has been not enough attention, right, on like female artists. For so many reasons. I think that part of it, like very simplistically put, was really that historically there was like an heritage, right, that, you know, comes from like the Middle Ages where there were no women artists, right, just like there were no entrepreneurs, which were women up until the 50s. So I believe that that has definitely changed today. What I think is the biggest contribution that I'm giving as like art lover is the maximum art prize for women. I mean, that's really how you know, put it on the table, to put these works of women who are artists into a limelight, I guess. Changing the idea that, like, at the end of the day, yes, a woman is a woman, but like an artist is an artist, no?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I don't think we should be choosing based on gender or based on anything really. I mean, we have a love for art, but I do think that, for me at least, I feel that I have a level of responsibility to be supporting women artists, right? We don't exclusively show them. There's many artists that I love and that I show in the gallery, but I do feel, as a woman, a responsibility to be supporting them in various ways that I do.
I'm happy.
I can go.
Go.
I'm just the middle one. So I think that there is a responsibility, and I love the phrase art lover. I too am an art lover. And when I step back and look at what I've curated and what's in my collection, I always look at different time periods within my life, and I see these stories that I have been unconscious during that time period, and then I can become conscious once I see it fully. Now I'm more conscious and determined in terms of who and what I'm collecting and what it really means. But whether it's a woman, a man, anything in between, black, white, anything in between, the first is a connection with the work. And if it's a living artist, then it's a connection with the artist. I might hate the artist but love the work. If you know me, I don't hate anyone. But or I may love the artist and not really care for his or her work. So I think, yes, it is important to support and create communities. And as a woman, I that's what I know. So that's what I gravitate to on a conscious or unconscious level. I might also gravitate towards something I don't know. And maybe it is made by a man or made by a woman or something in between. But it's the work and it's that passion and it's that real creation that I gravitate towards. But I do agree. I think especially now is a time where we need to create our communities and foster our communities of emerging artists, babies, to go, every time I speak, I'm somehow going to tie in your child, and have that next generation feel supported and feel that there's an engagement and a willingness to participate and to create and open all of the doors that are possible. But yes, it is important to have a responsibility. With contemporary artists, it's important to grow and not be a one-time collector, to really foster that relationship. I see someone here I've known for years and years, Chantel, who is incredible, and her work speaks for itself, and having that friendship and that journey throughout the years and seeing what she's been able to develop is so exciting because we're growing together. So to have that sense of community and that sense of loyalty and friendship, anything is truly possible.
I mean, I think I would sort of echo what all of you have said. I mean, community, I think, is incredibly important. I think that's in a way specifically within the art worlds, and I'd like to speak in pluralities because I think someone in LA may feel they live in a different sort of art world than someone here, and I have a tendency as a New Yorker to be very New York centric. I feel I live in the center of the universe at times, and so it's always nice to be reminded that that's not the case. But I do think that community is incredibly important. That was sort of said tongue-in-cheek as someone who has family all over the world. But I do think, so community is important, and I will say that I absolutely feel a tremendous responsibility as a woman and also as a Black woman. That is who I am, and whether it's sort of, I think both consciously and unconsciously, has definitely informed how I move through the world, and by extension how I move through art world. So on the one hand, I think I feel a tremendous sense of a tremendous need to continually work at building community and clearing space for women and for people of color. And I think that in certain ways the art world very much mirrors just sort of society at large, and those projects, for lack of a better term, I think are a necessity in both of those spaces. I will also say that as a curator, to echo what both of you have said, I definitely go to the work first. And maybe that's sort of my more traditional art historical kind of training, but as somebody who loves art and supports art, but also has sort of a visceral kind of intense emotional connection with work, it usually starts there. But there, I am in a position to make choices about visibility, about platforms, about presentations, and about who I am able and fortunate enough to collaborate with. And so I just came from a full day of jurying for a big art prize, and I was just very, very conscious of all of the wonderful work in front of me, but also representation and personhood, and that's incredibly important to me. So as I was looking at the work and responding to the work, I was also keeping in mind the artists and also the content, because I think, to your point, when there isn't a kind of a constant awareness about our communities and what they look like, and ensuring that they're diverse and varied, I think that's better for all of us, right? We walk into museums, we see a broad range of work from a broad range of time periods, generations, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, whatever it may be. And I think that we all benefit in that way. So for me in my work, that's top of mind in my scholarship, in my curating, and in opportunities, whether I'm in a position to bring a younger artist into the fold or recognize, and I think we can all agree that in particular, I hear you, girlfriend, in particular, women artists and even older women artists, right, who have gone unrecognized, when we have those opportunities to acknowledge them and, kind of make that statement that they are a part of the various communities that make up the art world. I think it's really important.
No, I think just being conscious of all these
Absolutely.
things, right? I don't think any of us are going to select work based on a particular criteria, but even these types of conversations and raising more awareness, I think that makes a huge
Absolutely.
difference, and we all play a part in that way. I think a lot of people talk about, well, maybe if there were more women that were collecting, then that would shift certain dynamics in the field. I was reading in ArtNet's top 200 collectors, right, that it was 38% of the collectors are women, and of those listed, only 14 were listed individually without a spouse. So, Anna and I were talking earlier how isn't it wonderful that really the first or second generation of women that are collecting on their own on such significant scale. But I just kind of wonder how would the landscape look different if there were more women collecting, and is there anything that we can do to foster that as women that are already in the arts?
Well, I'll chime in there again. I'll pass it down this way. you know, there's a part of me that wants to be really careful not to essentialize and assume that, you know, female collectors or black collectors or whomever collect work by those artists. And I actually think there are a couple of studies that are underway that are actually looking at patronage and that may be able to kind of provide further information about collecting patterns based on whether it's gender or socioeconomic background or, you know, location. So I think that'll be interesting in terms of seeing what those results yield. But the one thing I think, and you brought this up actually, and I think it's really important, we were talking in our sort of dress rehearsal, right, is the idea of access. I think that's incredibly important, and by that I mean, and yes, there's the sort of building wealth and understanding that when you collect, oftentimes we're talking about having a certain amount of, you know, disposable income, for lack of a better term. But even beyond that, it's about access and education and information. So I really loved how you pointed out in our, you know, sort of our earlier discussion that, you know, bringing younger women along when we go to museum functions or galleries or art exhibitions, right? Or just our, you know, friends as a way of providing different points of entry to art, to the idea of collecting, right? To the idea of engaging with work and engaging with artists. I still think as much as, you know, and I'm sure many of us in this room would agree, when you go into a Chelsea gallery, it can be incredibly intimidating. If that's not a space that you're sort of typical, you know, used to sort of visiting, and I think opening up that mystique in a way, and or frankly maybe even getting rid of it by bringing people along in the fold, you know, and sort of into our fold, is a really important starting point, right, in terms of opening up that kind of collecting base and those possibilities.
What was it, 14% by themselves? And then 36%?
38% women overall, 14 listed individually without a spouse.
Right. So we're here today. Let's all buy some art. Then we'll help the stats. You know, I do think it's the paradigm is shifting in terms of who the collector is. I'm going to generalize. Guys sometimes have bigger egos and like to talk more, so maybe that's also why they're on the list. First, if we're going to, you know, be more subtle and, oh, I'm not going to talk about this. It's let's break the glasses and let's jump on the tables and tell everyone that we're here and we're here to stay. But that requires all of us to really foster and mentor every generation. So I could be fostering and mentoring someone who's 75, who cares? Or someone who's 15. It's creating, to use that word again, a community. And women need to support women. And a lot of times we don't. And we backstab and we're competitive and all that stuff. And you know what? Shame on us. And now let's change that. And it starts with each individual to, again, create this sense of family, and then the stats will change. And you know, my mom is a powerful CEO. Her mom thought she was crazy that she was going to leave being a 10-year teacher in a cupcake town and go and try something. So really, we're only at third generation of women in power if we want to totally simplify the conversation. So, you know, the cards are stacked against us, but it's a new time, and really, let's stop feeling sorry for ourselves. If you do, I don't think any of us do here, and really show the world what we have to say, what we have to collect. And collecting contemporary art is really a signature of what's going on today, and a reflection of the political, the social, the economical, all the alls that there are. So the more that we can create this sense of belonging and access, to use that, the better we'll be. And a stat is a stat. We know that you can chop numbers in a lot of different ways so that it looks good for whatever the story is. But even if you did make that a little prettier, it's still not a very pretty picture. But I'm confident that in the years to come that will change and we'll have a stronger voice. I didn't bring her in, but she's now up, so that's good.
No, I think that's great. You know, even when you're talking about community and women supporting women, you know, I think back to when I founded this organization. right? And what I noticed was that women really weren't playing together, and we weren't supporting each other. And I was so fortunate to have, another 5 women around me when I was at Christie's at the time, and we supported each other entirely in every way. We were each other's resources for everything, including around going to the galleries and buying art together. That's how we figured everything out and how we navigated. And building this organization, it was like, okay, let's take this group and just make it bigger. And if we're constantly doing that, whether it's in our businesses and encouraging women to buy more, it's so incredible. The impact is amazing. And it works. It really works.
I think also, the only thing that I would like to add to like what you have said, it might change a little bit of like the perception of like contemporary art, to the extent of like the fact that gentlemen very often, and I don't say that to generalize, but there is this bullish and very stock exchange approach to contemporary art that has happened lately in terms of like, let's buy to resell, right? I think that there is this kind of like competition, that's definitely not the case. I'm very lucky because I was raised by a very lovely gentleman, so that's really not what I've been perceiving in the art world. But I believe that, getting back to what we were saying about like, the idea of a taste, the idea of like really a concept of collection, which is timeless, right? And it's an act of love, and nevertheless, and a selection, right? Collection at the end of the day comes from the Latin, which makes a choice, right? And therefore there is like, this concept of really going there and making your choice when you collect art. And in a way, I think it is very contemporary because it's about, making your choice and making the world really know that you are making a choice to the extent of collecting, right? So I believe that in a way, though, if I think of what happened, was the world like, maybe only 30 years ago, look at how many steps have happened, right? And I'm very pleased. At the end of the day, I think that we're headed in the right direction.
Me too. I feel very optimistic.
I'm absolutely
really
very
do.
optimistic.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here otherwise.
Good. So speaking of the world, are there any particularly new challenges in this current climate that you haven't seen before?
I was
It's
gonna.
just, yeah, we,
Yeah.
I think we all have
with
the same
regards to
answer
art or
of
other
it.
things.
We can talk about whatever you like,
I'm
but
joking,
maybe we
I'm
can
joking.
usually all-
Let's stick with art.
Yeah,
There's
that's,
enough
we'd be here
going on
all
in this
night.
sector.
But I would actually say, just in keeping with this theme of supporting artists, that funding streams are shifting. And more and more, the pool of artists is growing, but the pool of funds, whether it's a grant or a foundation or residency, I think in many ways is shrinking. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is thinking about how to support artists more directly, and that's one of the reasons why I brought up the idea of sort of using technology and the tech platform, a platform like Kickstarter. I've had multiple conversations. I know you and I are involved with an artist who is actively fundraising and started, on Kickstarter, but I've had a number of conversations with artists around how to approach support directly for their projects. So that's just one, we sort of file that away. That's one area. I think for me, and I work at Westfield, which is a kind of global corporation, and I have an annual budget, and I earmark as much of it as I can for either institutional support or partnerships. And then also trying to work with nonprofits who are working with usually singular artists, because it's such a massive space at the Oculus, but working with kind of nonprofit partners that are working to help a singular artist realize their vision. So those kind of really trying to rethink how artists, how we can support them, and sort of how funding is disseminated. And then the other thing, and I always like to kind of big up my dear, incredible friend and just an incredible human being, Aggie Gund, who is someone that has just started, this incredible fund to support artists and arts organizations that are also really working in the space of art and social practice and art and social justice. But she did that by, to your point, Sarah, I think we're all saying this, galvanizing her friends. And challenging her friends to step up to the plate and sort of say, you are I sold my Liechtenstein and I got this much money, and rather than put it in the bank, I'm going to start this fund. What are you going to do? And it was remarkable, I mean, and a number of those collectors that stepped up were women, right? So again, when we start viewing women as collaborators and assets and not threats, because there is more than, plenty of room at the table for all of us. We don't want to buy into that old school notion that, there's only room for one, which I think still a lot of us do. But her collector friends, many of them women, stepped up to the plate with the sale of work and then added that to that fund. So again, another interesting example, kind of more recent example of how we, and in particular women, are stepping up to the plate and really trying to think outside the box, or I maybe even say not even see a box, to find avenues to really make art happen for artists.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and I think that the crowdsourcing and funding and Kickstarter and even the pledge of, hey, I'm going to do this, what are you going to do? I love this music too. I feel like we're at a climax or something. But it's very good. Yeah. But so, pardon?
2nd Street.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So it's really creating. I lost my train of thought. But in terms of, we're all pledging, and we're all. It comes to funding, and it comes to resources, and there are limited resources, right? And it comes back to time. But if we all are able to say, okay, this is a cause I truly believe in, and it's a transparent cause, and you know what's going on, then you can see the impact that you individually are giving. The problem and the challenge I see today is the quality. I think that everyone and anyone is an artist, and anyone and everyone is saying that their art is so much money. And it's like, what's actually going on here, and what's the quality? What are the credentials? And how can we ensure that the art is truly art and not this trendy hype or hedge fund type of mentality or speculation? So that's the challenge I face. Walking around New York, a lot of times I'm thinking, okay, what's going on in the art market right now? Where do I have to go? Do I have to go to Zurich? Do I have to go to Mexico City? And the answer is really, how can an emerging artist who just graduated an MFA, is up over his or her head in debt, live in New York City, then have the creative thought process after figuring out how to survive? So, right, if you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay rent, how you're going to get a studio, how you're going to eat something and date someone or whatever, put clothes on that make you look like an artist, how are you all of a sudden going to be thinking? And art is about the creative thought and about expression. And when you put all of that stress on you, how do you create that? So how on earth are we going to create that community in New York City, which is supposed to be the artistic hub, when it's impossible to live? So I think that there has to be some sort of a fix. I don't know what that is, but to really get the quality back and also the living situation back, so creativity can foster. Mono, which is in New Jersey, is a fantastic place, and that's where Chantel's studio is, and a lot of studios, and they've created a sense of community. The Wassaic project that's up in Wassaic near Millbrook also has fantastic residency programs and fantastic curatorial programs. And if the artists and if all of us know that you can get access, be it through NIFA or other organizations, you can get grants, you can get Kickstarters, you can have the opportunities. But unfortunately, people don't know that those opportunities exist, and then they stop being an artist because at the end of the day, they have to pay their bills. So that's the challenge I see in terms of the quality and then also the resources that are lacking for artists. But I think that it's going to be okay.
You know, I think that you made a very, very strong point, and if I may bring it to the table, it broke my heart when basically I've realized that like whatever used to be the contemporary art market and idea in the 70s, which was like in the Rome school, right? It all was swept away. First of all, because in Italy, you pay the highest transaction if you're a gallerist in terms of taxes, all right? And therefore, there is absolutely no incentive whatsoever for an artist to come and live in Italy, right? So all our artistic community came here only to find that it's even tougher because, well, it's not Italy, right? And Italy is a beautiful place to live, ultimately. Great wine. So that was really, you know, to your point, something that it's very meaningful to me, and that is part of the reason why, you know, I try to fund any project that I can through universities in terms of really like supporting, you know, these young artists through association that supports young performing artists, because at the end of the day, those are the future. And the beauty of like seeing a new set of eyes, right, that is not completely biased by this art market, by how much you've sold, by the secondary market, and those, and so that like, you know, like your ego is like so much pressure on it, right? Therefore, I truly believe that, you know, that is really also the idea of recreating what New York used to be, right? Was these centers of like, you know, intellectual exchange used to be. Ultimately, culture is very much a part of art, and you know, I think it's like our duty to get deep, you know, in reading and understanding, and exactly to your point, to value actual art, right? Because now art, unfortunately, is very fashionable. You know, it's very trendy to love art, right? Maybe in 5 years it's going to be design again. But I believe that it's a duty of like an art person like of us, you know, who have the opportunity of like working in this world to really create as much as we can in terms of like connecting dots and like bringing the funds to artists so that they can keep nurturing us, you know. It's an exchange back.
Absolutely.
I think that goes back to patronage. So I think we just went full circle.
Exactly.
So, you know, we know that we can solve any problem when we know what the problem is. So if it is an international artist, well, maybe there are grants or through those countries. Or if it is in New York, it's seeing, okay, this is an emerging artist who just graduated school. I saw his or her work. I saw her work at Columbia, and I believe in it. Okay, well, that's when I get all of my friends, we go to the studio and we make it happen. And those are the conversations that have to be had, and I think are happening on small scales.
See, I agree. Maybe not organically, but yes, I agree.
So that's patronage in today's world. Because you can pay and get access to every institution and every organization, be it a for-profit or non-profit. But at the end of the day, the art has to be made by creative individuals. So if that's not there, then why are you part of a group? So
good point. No, I think that's a wonderful idea, you know, to gather together and to really be proactive about it. But outside of that, just in talking about the hope for the future, what are some of the institutions or residencies, other programs that are addressing this dialogue? Things to look at, people to look for?
Well,
I mean, sorry, it just goes to several of your points.
yeah.
Go.
no, what did you say, sorry?
Pioneer work.
Pioneer work, she said.
Residency.
Yes,
programs.
I have a couple of projects in mind which I cannot disclose, obviously, yet, but I do have like projects where you really, you know, want to fund, you know, ideally students. One thing that I really always take is under my radar, also under my loving arm, is Ballroom Marfa, because Ballroom Marfa is an outside-the-box institution. No conflict of interest here because I am part of the board of trustees, but I think, I mean, that there's a reason why I'm a board of trustees of Ballroom, you know, because I think that they are really trying to do things for the artist and like bringing in like an outside voice. And another institution that I really feel very attached to is Young Arts, which is like, you know, a funding program for from students in high school for performing and visual arts. I think that's a great program. And I think that what they're doing at Even Magazine, Rebecca Siegel, is quite interesting in terms of like level of culture.
Yeah, that's great. All of them are great.
Yeah, I think all of the above. I think, as Bettina alluded, Pioneer Works is fantastic because it bridges a whole bunch of different areas that sometimes are siloed. So to have that conversation under one roof is very unique, and it's a young organization, and there's a lot of potential there. I think that look at who the next curators are for the Whitney's Biennial. 2 kick-ass ladies. So here we are, we're seeing an institution that is an old institution, but always on the cutting edge. So I'm really bullish, to use the word if we're going to talk hedge funds and all that, about the Whitney Museum. And of course the Guggenheim Museum. I think the Guggenheim Museum is a global institution, and it really connects what's going on today. And I'm fortunate enough to sit as a co-chair of the Young Collectors Council, and we acquire work from contemporary artists who are within our age group. So as we rise, those artists rise. But all of those institutions I just noted create that sense of fostering a community, create a sense of community, and it fosters that community through activation and through events. And of course, this organization, which is celebrating its 10th year, I mean, it's a Monday evening, the room is packed, it's standing room only, and it's the Monday before Christmas. So that speaks to a need and a desire for conversation, and I don't think we have enough conversation. So I think maybe we need to create more organizations that have conversations. But the list of organizations that are impactful and I'm excited about it's a long list. And they all are in different vehicles, and they all can classify art or culture in different ways. But when you look at it as an ecosystem, they're very complementary. So I think 2018 and beyond is going to be really incredible.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo a lot of what both of you have said, and to put a few plugs in, I guess, for institutions. I happen to be a really big fan of the Underground Museum in LA, which is a small museum that's sort of slowly rising. They have some incredible programming, and they really work hard to support, in particular, younger voices. I also sit on the board, and it's actually not that well known. It was started by collectors about 3 years ago, and it's a space called Queen Space. For any of you artists here in the room, we offer free studio space for a year in Long Island City. And the only condition is that when you are done, the artist donates one work that he or she has created to the Queen Space Foundation, and it becomes part of their permanent collection, which they then display. It's queenspace.org. And then, I'm on the board of the new museum, and one thing that I will say, and I think we all have kind of echoed this, I think in order for artists to thrive, they have to do so independently. They have to have a sort of freedom of thought and creativity. And I think it's really important that they also have to be allowed to fail. They have to be allowed to fail. If you think about it, there are very few careers, and this came up on another panel that I did, I think, last week on Patreon, but very, very few careers where people create things or do things, and sometimes they flop and sometimes they don't. But there's a lot of pressure on artists. And so I think having, I think about the new museum, specifically New Ink, and sort of this experimental kind of incubator, right, where art and technology or art and science or art and art kind of converge. And there have been some incredible success stories, and some stories that, aren't that great, but they've had this space and this community where they've been allowed to experiment and be creative without sort of feeling hindered in a way. And I think those sort of spaces are really important. And then the other thing that just came up as I was sort of walking here, and it is a little bit of a different kind of subject, but I will put it under the sort of auspices of supporting artists, are art writers. Where are our art critics?
Exactly.
We have had the same, no disrespect, art critics for as long as I can remember. And I feel in a way that it's actually in and of itself a dying art form. Art, people who write about art, those are the individuals that offer artists these platforms of visibility that make connections for so many of us that we might not see when we go to an exhibition. When we think about an artist's work, those are the individuals that also cover artists over the course of their career, right? think about the writing on Louise Bourgeois' work, right? From the beginning, I mean, she had a solo show, as far as I'm concerned, too late in the game, in her game. But think about that writing, right? And what that does for the longevity, right, of an artist's career. So I'm a big fan of art writers. If we have any writers in the room, I know Robin is a godsend. Thank you, Robin. But I also, even in my teaching, when I find a student who's really just gifted at writing about art and really kind of encouraging visual literacy on all of our parts, I really try to foster that. There's one young man, Antoine Sargent, who's on the up and up, who is so astute and engaged. I feel like everywhere I go, I see him. He's sort of one of those people where it's like, Antoine, what are you doing here? It's like, well, I'm like, here, I'm going to write about art. And he travels, he's engaged, you know, at all different levels. Fairly young, has very, very tech savvy, and has a sort of very strong technological kind of platform and place as well. But I think one to keep an eye on, and is very committed to writing about artists' work in a very, very diverse range. And I know I can speak for him on that front. So those are sort of my three little areas, in addition to supporting a lot of the outside of the box organizations as well that I think are really important.
Fantastic. I didn't know about some of these things. It's wonderful to hear about. I think we could open it up to the audience for some questions, if there are any. We're also, I think, streaming live on Facebook. So Molly, if we have any questions on our from our virtual audience, we can take those as well.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Sure. Firstly, so many good points that you all mentioned, from access to community. You know, as an artist, one thing that I've noticed as we talk about supporting artists, yet we don't really give artists the keys and the tools that they need to support themselves. And those keys and tools are to be a self, you know, individual artist that knows how to do their taxes, that knows how to read a contract, that understands about business. And this idea that we don't see artists as business people really stifles artists to be self-contained. And what happens is that we leave school and then we're taken advantage of for many years, and then when we've become fairly successful, some people call us a sellout, and then now all that's changed is that now we have huge overheads, and because we're not a business, we have no real room to grow, or we don't know how to grow. What are your thoughts on that, as an artist being a business person and giving artists the real keys that they need to succeed from the beginning, kind of allowing them to grow from that way out?
Well, can I answer that? I think that there's something wrong in the art world if the artist has to be a business person.
Okay, but the thing, you know, so what I mean by that is, like, okay, so it's a romanticized view that the artist is this person that just wakes up and creates and makes something beautiful. You know, no artist ever. Art comes from hard work and practice and process and understanding your process. And a part of that is understanding how you operate as an artist today in New York, when you do have to wake up and you can't afford a lawyer, you can't afford someone to do this, you can't afford all these people around you to make sure that you can make your art and survive. You need to have some access or some understanding of business. You need to have some access and understanding of how you can grow in your career, versus just waking up and having this romantic day where you create work and there's that.
And Chandra, you see that not even in just, I mean, if you think kind of in creative spaces, think about musicians, right? Think about fashion and models. Think about, I mean, the business of art is incredibly important for artists. I advocate, and I have, you know, many of the artists that are sort of flying high today, we all grew up together. I happen to have a very strong business sense, as some of you who know me. I don't know where it came from, but I have a very strong business sense, or maybe it's that bit of entrepreneurial spirit. But one of the first things I tell artists, you know, do you know how to consign work? Do you know how to track your work? when you start making money, do you have an LLC? Because you need to be able to write off your materials, your studio space, the $20 museum ticket to see a big show. Otherwise, you will be left with nothing, right? And many galleries also take this approach. It's not that the artist needs to become a full-on business person, but they need to be able to have agency and a certain savvy about their cultural production, right? And about their cultural currency. Because really this and this is all you have. So I'm a very big advocate. If you need a lawyer to look over contracts, right? New York, there's a volunteer lawyers for the arts. They have an incredible group of lawyers that are willing to do that. But I do think that it's important for artists to, again, to your point, not delve in completely and run a business, but you need to be very smart about your career. And you, at the end of the day, need to sort of be in control to a degree.
I think I didn't get your point at the beginning, so
Yeah.
I wanted.
But I agree with you. I mean, an artist does not need to be runing their own gallery in
You need
addition
some
to their
knowledge.
practice.
No, but that is a
100%.
very fair point.
Yep.
You know.
In theory, of course, and to use your word, Chantel, this romanticized vision of the artist waking up and creating, that of course would be the ideal. The reality is you have to pay your bills, you have to do everything that one needs to do, and an artist comes out of art school or doesn't come out of art school but starts creating, and then all of a sudden does need to be the businesswoman. So I think the problem that needs to be solved is how do we put together all of the resources that are out there, but they're disenfranchised. It's it's all over the place. So if someone can connect the dots and create this handbook, and maybe that's what we create, a handbook of this is what you do. Because when you're getting your MFA, you're not getting your MBA. So maybe there needs to be some sort of a class on
The business
stat
of art for
or
artists.
stats or something.
NYFA is the only
Right,
source
but that's
for
the
that.
thing. If you don't know that NYFA exists and you try and find it on their website, I mean, you're digging and digging, and all of a sudden you have an idea and you're onto that idea. I mean, you can't redirect every single person in life to go back to that. So I think if there can be sort of this way or knowledge in terms of here is your trajectory, and maybe that's a consulting, or maybe that's thinking outside the box from the traditional blue chip gallery. I'm pointing at Marianne Boski's lady right here.
I'm not married.
One day,
Representative.
But I think that the more we can communicate what the challenges are, the more we can fix them.
Actually, there's a startup idea right there.
I know,
if you think
that's what
about
I'm
it.
thinking. There you go. Let's
And there
create
are
it
a couple
after
of
the
good
new
books
year.
out there. The Business of Art for Artists. I know at NYU we actually have the Business of Art for Artists. That is a course that artists, that I encourage a lot of the artists before they graduate to take. And it talks to you about how to set up an LLC, how to, what consignment for. I mean, just the basic things. Not running an entire business,
that
but
makes
the
sense.
basic things so that you maintain agency.
But that's only NYU. So how do we get access to
The whole
all those
universe,
who are
yeah.
not going that traditional path that then get you into
Right.
debt, then get you upset, and then all of a sudden you become, working on Wall Street, but all you want to do is paint.
No,
And then you go to therapy for the rest of your life because you just not get what you wanted.
No, and to your point, Chantel, I actually think that you brought up like something quite interesting, because in a way it is something that to get to know, to have that set of knowledge is as you call them very interestingly tools, right? I think that it kind of like gives you a certain like bargain power, because you know what I mean, like there is like a much broader version that like, so I think it is a very good point.
Yeah, otherwise you're always relying on other people, and the sad
Yeah.
story is you get taken advantage
Yeah.
of for the most part, unless you're extremely lucky. Yeah.
Maybe POWarts for artists.
Thank you, Bettina, for saying that out. No, I have thought about POWarts for Artists for many years, and maybe one day. But I'll say that I relate to what you're saying, even as a dealer, because part of the reason that this organization started is that even women that are on the commercial side, like myself, I didn't come out with an MBA. You know, I was an art historian that also studied fresco conservation. Like, did you think I know how to do big deals? I didn't. You know, so part of the mission of this organization, why we started, was to supplement, you know, to bring in women that were working in law and in finance, and also, you know, within our field, of course, who could then offer their skills, and we would share our skills, and so we became each other's resources. And that was in large part, you know, why we started and what we continue to do. Because I think for a lot of us, you know, we weren't equipped either, you know, to work in the business end because we didn't have the training for it.
Yeah.
You know, as art historians, we don't know much about budgets. That's the truth. You know, so we had to learn. And I think, you know, something like that for artists, whether it's generated by artists, whether I say yes to Bettina and I create something for artists, maybe one day with all these wonderful women. Yeah, something like that needs to happen.
No, but also with like the online technology, there's like so much, you know, opportunity to kind of like build like a platform which is virtual, well, nevertheless, it doesn't necessarily need to be physical, you know, but like you can find like a set of information and like Q&A that can be like executed like more promptly, you know what I mean?
It's a great idea. I think
I have my moments.
Yeah. I think it's happening. I mean, I'm an associate producer for a film that just got into Sundance, which is super cool, but it's called The Expense of Everything, and it's about the art market, and it's all about access. The director is this guy, Nathaniel Kahn, who's won an Academy Award for My Architect. So I do think that we're at a time. This film, it's a documentary. We'll see how it goes. It's awesome. But I think that access is key, and people want access. And I think we're going to see more of an educational arm develop to support artists, dealers, etc. That's a little bit more organized.
I'd love to see it happen.
I just want to add one contribution to what was being said earlier about resources. I recently was in New Orleans for Prospect, and something that they did this version and last version, and maybe the second one as well, in the back of the catalog, there's actually a listing for all of the curatorial contributors for each of the writings about each artist. So for galleries or individuals who are looking to, you know, support writers or curatorial voices outside of the ones that we're seeing so often, thinking about large group shows like that, seeing that as a resource. You know, if you're redirecting some of your advertising funds, or you want a new voice brought into the gallery to curate a show, looking to the back of catalogs of shows like that that are showing not just diverse voices critically but also artistically, those are really interesting resources. It's probably about 45 people who contributed to that catalog alone. So just in that, you know, everyone here is interested in the visual arts, look at large shows like that, see what institutions are supportive, like the Tang is great with publications. There are certain institutions that really prioritize that, and kind of seeing that as not just a book about the artists, but, you know, who's writing about them and who's supporting them, you know, whether it's a $50 payment for a 300-word essay or something larger, but just to be aware of those resources too.
Yeah, Victoria.
Maria, you mentioned sort of subtly earlier about performance art being a big part of the future, and I'm curious to hear what you all think about the relationship between performance art and patronage.
Wow. I mean, I, to me, and I'm speaking like personally from like my idea of like taste, you know, I think that yes, performing art is definitely something that is part of the future, to the extent that, you know, if you think about like the contribution that, once again, technology, right, or, you know, videos has happened. Like, I mean, Max Mara just did in Korea, we did like this show which was like a retrospective of like our 66 years of history, and basically part of this show was like a dome which was projecting a very moving and, you know, a video, right, that a female artist once again had, like, you know, done. But to bring it back to your question, I believe that, like, you know, the role of technology will play something, you know, to the extent that art is not just, you know, the idea of like the painting or the traditional, right, like means that we used to have, but like the dancing and, you know, like the usage of like different things. To the way that I strongly believe it is quite fascinating in a way, and it is part of like, I believe it is part of like also an experience that an artist should have like throughout the course of their career. If they decide to kind of like, you know, get towards something different, I think it's quite exciting. Patronage, well, it's more expensive, right? Because I mean, you know, like to build and to project and to fund, in a way, the idea of like performing art is something that needs more funds. Usually, not always, but like usually. What I personally, you know, believe, and I try to fund performing art at any time I can, because to me it's something that like I personally love very much, and I think that it is a way also a little bit more direct, right? Like to bring art to the public, it is more entertaining to the extent of like the word of entertaining, right? Rather than and it's very direct, right? I think that like patronage and like performing art, and I don't know if you do agree with me, is a really part of the discussion for the next decade, if you will, because I think it will be a problem, not a problem, but it will be like a need that will be developed to weigh it more.
I'm involved with Performa. I'm on the commissioning council for Performa, and when you're investing or you're curating or producing a performance piece, what is that piece? What are you getting? You are investing time, energy, and money in an idea that may last 15 seconds, 15 minutes, 15 hours, whatever, but then it's gone. So I think that performance art is part of art. I mean, the art on the wall, sure, this is from probably, I don't know, when is this from, the 70s?
It's from the 90s.
90s, okay, so the 90s to today, this is on the wall, and probably it's worth more than it was in the 90s, I don't know, from a market value, I assume. But how do you recreate that performance? And I think now with technology and with the global network that we have, performance is at center stage. And I think art is art, be it the opera, dance, contemporary art, it's culture, and it's feeding our soul, and it's feeding what we see today. So I do think performance art is really important. I think the question of what are you getting? What is the idea? How does it impact the audience and those who are participating in it in an active and an unactive way? And it's an expression of what's today. But it can be consumed, be it through edition prints, through a multitude of different areas. So it can live. It can live online. It can live as a film still. It can live in a lot of different ways. Josephine Messbecker has an incredible film about to launch next, I think, January at the Whitney Museum. And it is fantastic. To fundraise for that, she created stills from the video, which are beautiful works, and then you're investing in that film. So there are ways when you can be creative and think outside the box to fulfill whatever your dream or your idea is, be it within performance work, ballet, dance, music, contemporary art. So I think that performance art is critical, but I think we need to break down the silos and look at art for art's sake.
Wow. Go ahead.
So first of all, I'd like to share that I love the charisma of each individual of yours, and I believe women can have power, and I believe in women can support women. So I would like to share a little bit of my personal story and the challenges I'm facing, and also I would love to have some of your advice and suggestions. So basically, I don't have a background in art. I have a bachelor in law, and I got my Master of Art degree at Columbia here. And I met several friends while I was in school, and I believe in them. They make this fantastic art. And so I said, after a while, I said, why don't we just build an online platform and I represent you guys. I sell works for you back to China because I'm originally from China. And this is just an idea. And it's like a huge task in front of us. And they all support me. They all support my side. And we all share this kind of huge dream. But when it comes to register a company like LLC, like you said, I know there is a lot of free resources out there for you to get lawyers and get business counselor. But it takes forever for you to book an appointment even. So I have to pay for a ridiculous price for a best lawyer from the top law firms in New York. And not only just like financial situation, and also just emotionally. Sometimes I tell my friend that their works can be sold, but unless it got sold, they won't believe me. They will even say that they don't have the budget to take the pictures of their artworks. So I sent photographers to take pictures for their artworks. And once it got sold, they can be boosted. Their energy can be boosted, and then they can create more and more. But just before that, the huge, I guess my challenging right now I'm facing with is I'm a woman with color. And I don't have background in art. And my parents has nothing to do with art. And I don't have a white connection. And I'm building my own business. I have this huge dream, and I want to support my friends. They happen to be women. And it's just emotionally, I feel sometimes I am faithful in my own business, but I have to give extra face to those artists. And also financially, we're facing a lot of challenges. In terms of selling works, you go out and people are like, who is this random Asian? Like, who is this new girl? And we don't know her. And so I have to do all those branding, marketing for my own business, but thank God I have a degree in art education, so I can teach art to people, I can persuade them. And I also feel I have a sense of being entrepreneurial spirit, so that I can sell things to people. But still, like all those challenges, I just want to ask you, all of you, and for a woman with color and with no background and with little background in art, and who has this giant mission or giant dream, but still have a little capability at hand, and what could you do?
I mean, that's like, we gotta go out for drinks. That's like, I mean, again, I'll take and I say that with much love and respect. I'll take my kind of curator and scholar hat on and put my sort of business hat on. I can't tell you about I founded my LLC on LegalZoom.com, and I think it was $199, and it's a simple LLC, and it's a sole, sort of a sole proprietorship. But I just wanted to be able to kind of write off certain things. For you, it's a bit more complicated because you're also talking about transactions across borders, right? And when you get into sort of national versus international, it can be a bit more complicated. So you may, I would recommend, and you never know, if there are organizations like New York, Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts, it may be a good starting place. But the one thing I would say to you is, do you have a business plan? You don't have to answer that, but I think a business plan is a roadmap, and even for Chantal's question around thinking of yourself as an entity, not overly corporate, but these are my goals now, this is where I want to go. What is your roadmap to get there, right? So you've got, I would start there, and you can literally start, and don't laugh at me because there may be some hardcore business people here, but Business Plan for Dummies, those yellow books that used to have a CD in the back that are totally, useless at this point, and you can actually you can download them, and it's actually that basic. I'm not going to give up names, but I've told many artists back in the day, just start with that book and figure out where you are and what your 2, 3, 4, 5-year plan is and where you want to go. Business plans are essential, right? That is your roadmap. You will never get where you're, not never, but you will not get where you're going unless you have a plan, right? And it sounds like you've got a lot of really great parts, but you need to kind of organize them, right? And then the other point is just more of a, rah rah Oprah chant. You are here, you deserve to be here, you walk in places, walk in like you own it and you know it, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise.
And you can also get while you're looking into the LLC, you can get a DBA. It's doing business as. Very easy to do. It doesn't protect you as much as for the legal, any transactional stuff, but it does provide you with, you're able to do
write-off after when we There's a lot of, I can feel the business power in this room.
There's also a lot of organizations for young entrepreneurs, and there's also one in the arts. Join one of those groups, start talking to people. They have events all the time on different business subjects, even POWarts. I mean, there's so many organizations like this that are for specifically entrepreneurs, where you can be asking these types of questions and finding.
Columbia's got a great entrepreneur.
Yeah.
That's maybe a place as an alum that you may be able to go.
And you also have your law degree, and you have your master's in art. So please don't discredit your qualifications and those networks you already have. But also remember, have realistic expectations. If you're informing artists that you're going to be able to give them the dream, first you have to know your dream before you're able to help others. So have really realistic expectations and understand that it's scaffolding. So it might take 7 years to get to whatever that point is, but have those little goals to get to the big goal. And also note that a lot of companies do fail, and you're a startup. So if you can buy it or build it, or you can work with another organization to see how they're doing, and then pivot and create your own, think in those terms as well. But first take care of yourself and figure out what you want to then be able to help others.
And thank you for sharing. Really good.